Okay, guys, this is going to be my review of The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, the first film in the Hobbit trilogy, which is a prequel series to the Lord of the Rings. And I think the first thing off the bat is I love that they brought a lot of the characters back. That was necessary. I love that they brought Gandalf back and Saruman and I forgot the girl. I forgot the girl's name. The blonde girl in the film, and they brought that elves back, and they brought the King of Elves, and I love again like that mythology, that the kind of Middle Earth mythology is very grand. So I love exploring that in more in depth in these films, and I think the effects in many ways have evolved, but I think like some of the CGI has gotten a little bit worse. I feel like they rely on it a lot more than I feel like they did in Lord of the Rings. But that does make for some great establishing shots, great just wide shots. But I think sometimes in this film it almost looked video game like, especially in the fight with the dwarves, or not the fight with the orcs in the mines. It almost looked like you were just watching a Lord of the Rings video game. Insert Gandalf there, insert dwarfs there, insert Bilbo there. But I love the stuff where you figure out how Bilbo got the ring, and I love the action. There's a lot of cool sequences. I think it's more funny, and I don't know if I should say that in a good way or a bad way. And I think I'm leaning towards maybe a little bit of a bad way, because I feel like there was jokes in the Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't just like quippy jokes, joke. It felt natural, and this just felt like but I guess in some ways it makes sense, because these are dwarves, and one of the funniest characters in Lord of the Rings was Gimli the dwarf. So it's not totally out there that it would be funny to have dwarves. Speaking of the dwarves, you got Bilbo, you got Gandalf, but I feel like, and you got the Dwarf King. Those are like, for me, the three individual characters we follow through, because all the other dwarves kind of just blend together. Versus in Lord of the Rings, there's a lot more diverse of the group. You got, when the Viking, I think you got Boromir, who's like a Viking type, person. You got an elf, you got a dwarf, you got a Strider, and King and Aragon, and then you got four hobbits. And I think it could be like, but wouldn't you get confused between the four hobbits? No, because unlike the Hobbit, there's only four hobbits, and one of them we know is Frodo, and we know Sam's his best friend, and Merry and Pippin are kind of always together, and so you kind of get very familiar with these four quickly. And I think you would get familiar with, if you just said four hobbits instead of, there was probably 10 hobbits, or 10 dwarves that went along in the journey. Thing is, if they picked four dwarves, we would get to know them throughout the film. But because you have 10 hobbits, I don't know their names. I barely remember which one's which. I know there's one that's has white hair, and one that's obese, and then there's one that's it's like I get the Dwarf King, but then all the other dwarves kind of blend in. Versus when you have four hobbits, you learn very quickly the individuality of each hobbit beyond just Frodo and Sam and Pippin and Merry. You know, because I think the problem is but if in Lord of the Rings, if they just had 100 hobbits, I wouldn't know the difference. So I think that's one of those cases where it's the cast I don't feel as connected in, because it's just a bunch of dwarves that kind of blend in as to one character. Because when I look back at the film, I just think of, okay, Gandalf, the Dwarf King, it's Bilbo, and a bunch of other dwarves. I don't think of them individually. You know what I mean? But yeah, I enjoy that. They also had Saruman as a hero, and I love the backstory of Smaug, and how you see what happens to the dwarves, so you do feel for them and want them to succeed at the end. And I love that they brought back the giant vulture, or not vultures, I don't know, giant pigeons or something. I don't know what to call them, vultures, birds, to come to the rescue. I love seeing Gandalf in action, and he does the whole bring down the staff thing at the beginning with older Bilbo and Frodo was kind of cool. So I think because I am so invested in the world of Lord of the Rings, I actually enjoyed this film, and I think more than I probably should have. And while it's not a bad film, it is nowhere to the quality of the first Lord of the Rings trilogy, where it's like this film might be like here, but like the Lord of the Rings is like all like this might be here and it's like all the way there. You know what I mean? It's and it's no disrespect to the Hobbit films. It's just that the Lord of the Rings is on a different level, where this just seems to set up just another, fantasy adventure trilogy. But with the Lord of the Rings, it kind of set up the fantasy adventure trilogy. You know what I mean? Type thing. So, and I think it also felt like a very similar to the Fellowship of the Rings, almost too similar, where it's like, okay, you start out early in the Shire, and then you get then you start out with a flashback in the Shire and Gandalf, and start on the quest and the journey, and ultimately it ends with a cliffhanger. And again, point being, it very much similar to it felt a lot of similar plot beats. Okay, halfway through the film, they go to the elf town elf village, the elf town, to regroup, and they meet Elrond, and again, it just felt like very similar to Fellowship of the Rings, and I don't mind it because I love Fellowship of the Rings so much. I just wanted to point that out there. And similar to Fellowship of the Rings, it just felt part one of a two-part series that I'm excited for. I'm excited to jump into the decimation of Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies. I'm invested into it. I care for these characters. I just think, and like I said with Fellowship of the Rings, and all these Lord of the Rings films, is where this film is incomplete in the overall story, but I feel like you still get a 3-act structure. You know what I mean? And so I think it felt like a film that you can watch on its own, but overall, you don't feel that full satisfaction because it is just part one of a 2-part, thing. But I mean, the character's great. It is funny. It had, but there is no shortage of action. There's great. Whether you talk about fighting the giant orc, and I love the word. And another comparison to Fellowship of the Rings, the Dwarf King goes on that redemption arc, a similar one to Boromir, where Boromir was powered and raged by the ring, and sacrifices himself, to save Frodo. And same thing with this guy, the Dwarf King, was very despising of Bilbo, and how he came to care for him, and he, and how the the Dwarf King put his life on the line to save Bilbo, to save the dwarves, and how, what's his face? Bilbo, returned the favor. And I am glad he didn't die, because I feel like he does seem like a good character that you can continue to go along with the trilogy. And I'd be interesting to see what kind of new characters they introduce, because I hope that they don't just keep on following with just the dwarves, because I mean, the dwarves, are cool kind of dwarves, but they just blend in, and I don't think all the dwarves have the individuality. I couldn't say it. The individually. I can't say it. Their own personality. The dwarves don't really have their own personality beyond the Dwarf King. But I really enjoyed this film, and I'm so stoked for the other films in the trilogy. Stay tuned for more videos coming at you.